"You look like a homeless beggar." My family laughed at my brother's party. I stayed silent, until I exposed her fake career and watched their finances crumble. I am Elias. I'm 33 years old, and for the last decade of my life, I allowed my own flesh and blood to treat me like an absolute stain on our family's supposedly pristine reputation. To understand the sheer, unadulterated madness of what happened at my younger brother's housewarming party last weekend, you have to understand the deeply toxic, exhausting history of my family. You have to understand the dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat. My brother, Caleb, is 29. He was the miracle baby, born 4 years after me, and from the exact second he took his first breath, the sun rose and set entirely on his shoulders. My father, Marcus, was a mid-level manager at a regional logistics firm. He was a man utterly obsessed with status, with looking like old money, even though we were solidly middle class. When Caleb came along, he was designated as the chosen one who would carry the family legacy into the upper echelons of society. Caleb was given absolutely everything. He got private tennis lessons, the newest gaming consoles the day they launched, and a brand new SUV wrapped in a giant red bow on his 16th birthday. I, on the other hand, was treated like a nuisance roommate who was perpetually falling behind on rent. If Caleb got a C+ on a geometry test, my parents threw a dinner party to celebrate his latent genius. If I got straight A's and won a state science fair, it was simply expected, barely warranting a distracted nod from my mother across the kitchen table. When Caleb needed help, the family checkbook flew open. My parents entirely drained a $100,000 college fund to send him to a private, out-of-state university, where he essentially partied away his 20s, changed his major 4 times, and graduated with a useless degree and a massive sense of entitlement. When it was my turn to go to college, my father sat me down in his study, poured himself a glass of cheap scotch he pretended was expensive, and told me that taking out student loans would build my character. He told me that paying my own way was the only method I would ever learn the true value of a dollar. So, I did exactly that. I built a mountain of character. I worked 3 miserable, soul-crushing jobs during my college years. I flipped burgers until my clothes permanently smelled of grease. I worked the graveyard shift auditing receipts at a rundown motel. And in the dead of night, using a cracked, second-hand laptop I bought at a pawn shop, I taught myself complex software architecture, advanced coding, and digital infrastructure. When my grandmother passed away, the $40,000 inheritance she left behind went straight to Caleb to help him buy a luxury downtown condo. I attended her funeral in a borrowed suit that was 2 sizes too big. At 23, I started my company, Zenith Dynamics, from a damp, freezing basement apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. I lived on bulk-bought rice, instant ramen, and sheer, unfiltered spite. I poured every single ounce of my soul, every drop of my energy, and every penny I scraped together back into the business. I sacrificed my entire 20s. I missed holidays, I skipped Thanksgiving dinners, I never took a single vacation. I drove a beat-up 2012 Toyota Corolla with a cracked dashboard because I preferred to spend my money hiring the absolute best developers and strategists in the industry. My chief operating officer, a brilliant woman named Sarah, and I used to sit on the concrete floor of that basement, drafting business models on cheap whiteboards until the sun came up and our hands were stained with dry erase marker. Over 10 grueling years, we ground our bones to dust, and we built an absolute empire. Zenith Dynamics became a powerhouse in enterprise software solutions. We swallowed up smaller competitors. We secured government contracts. We went global. My family knew I had some sort of little computer thing going on. They assumed I was a struggling IT freelancer, barely scraping by, fixing Wi-Fi routers for local pizza shops. I never corrected them. At first, I kept quiet because I wanted to surprise them when I finally made it big. I wanted to see that elusive pride in my father's eyes. But as the years dragged on, I realized they simply did not care enough to even ask. They never once asked for the name of my company. They never once asked how my day was. Eventually, my silence became a test of their basic human decency. A test to see if they could love Elias the struggling guy, not Elias the walking ATM. And they failed that test miserably, every single time we spoke. That brings us to last Saturday, the day of Caleb's lavish housewarming party. The exhaustion I felt pulling into his obnoxious, sprawling homeowners association neighborhood wasn't just the kind you get from missing a few hours of sleep. It was a physical weight, heavy and dragging, settling deep into the marrow of my bones. It was the cumulative, crushing fatigue of an 8-month corporate merger that had finally closed just 4 hours before I drove over. I had spent the better part of the week locked in a high-security boardroom in Chicago, surrounded by aggressive corporate lawyers and executives, hammering out the final, brutal details of a multi-million-dollar acquisition of Horizon Tech. I had barely eaten anything but stale bagels. I was running on cold black coffee and pure, unadulterated adrenaline. When the ink finally dried on those contracts, all I wanted to do was go home. And by home, I mean my actual home, the multi-million-dollar penthouse apartment downtown with the floor-to-ceiling windows, the silent climate control, and the peace I had worked a decade to afford. I should have ordered a ridiculously overpriced steak, drawn a hot shower, and slept for 16 solid hours, but I couldn't. Today was Caleb's housewarming. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I parked my rusted Toyota Corolla next to a gleaming, brand new Audi. It was a text from my father. It read, "Everyone is already here. Try not to look like you just rolled out of a dumpster, Elias. Caleb has very important people coming from his country club." 2. I just stared at the screen, letting the harsh backlight sting my dry, bloodshot eyes. Important people. The irony of that statement was sharp enough to cut glass, but I swallowed it down the exact same way I had swallowed every slight and insult for the last 10 years. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My dad wasn't entirely wrong. I looked completely wrecked. My hair was a messy mop. I was wearing an old, faded zip-up hoodie over a plain t-shirt because I had spilled an entire cup of coffee on my tailored dress shirt during a frantic meeting with my legal team that morning. I had dark circles under my eyes that made me look hollow. I looked like a man who was severely struggling to make ends meet. I looked like a guy who was one bad month away from losing everything. And the twisted reality is, that was exactly how my family preferred to see me. They needed me to be the failure so Caleb could shine even brighter by comparison. I turned off the ignition, grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, and walked up to the heavy oak front door of Caleb's new McMansion. I rang the bell, mentally preparing myself to survive just 3 hours of fake smiles and passive-aggressive jabs. The door swung open almost immediately, but it wasn't Caleb standing there. It was a woman I had never met in person, though I recognized her heavily filtered face from Caleb's social media. This was Vanessa, his new fiancée. She was stunning in a very manufactured, expensive way. Her hair was perfectly blown out, her makeup was flawless, and she was wearing a designer cocktail dress that looked like it cost more than a month's rent. She held a flute of champagne in one hand, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically against the crystal glass. She looked at me, her eyes traveled slowly from my scuffed sneakers, up my faded jeans, paused at the worn-out hoodie, and finally landed on my exhausted face. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. Instead, she turned her head slightly over her shoulder, shouting back into the grand foyer, her voice pitched high and mocking. "Caleb, babe. I think the cleaning crew is here, but they are really early." She turned back to me, a smug, arrogant smirk playing on her lips, her eyes cold and utterly devoid of any human warmth. "Deliveries and staff go to the side door, sweetie. We just had the imported hardwood floors polished, and we really do not want you tracking street mud into the foyer." The betrayal wasn't in her words. I was a CEO. I was used to people underestimating me in negotiations until I pulled the rug out from under them and bought their companies. The true betrayal, the one that felt like a serrated knife slipping between my ribs, was the booming laughter I heard erupting from the living room right behind her. I recognized that laugh instantly. It was my father. That was the exact moment the very last drop of warmth I had for my family evaporated into thin air. It was the absolute confirmation that in this family, I wasn't just the black sheep, I was the running joke. I stood taller, ignoring the burning ache in my shoulders. "I'm not the cleaning guy," I said, my voice raspy but entirely steady. "I am Elias, Caleb's brother." Vanessa's perfectly drawn eyebrows shot up in an exaggerated pantomime of surprise that didn't reach her eyes for a single second. Oh my God, Caleb, it's your brother. The one you told me about." She stepped back, pulling the door wide open, but she deliberately didn't move out of the way. She stood there like a toll guard, forcing me to squeeze awkwardly past her. As I did, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical, condescending whisper. "Wow, I am so sorry, I just mean, look at you. I naturally assumed. You just look so incredibly hard-pressed. I bet you're here to ask for a handout." I gripped the handle of the gift bag tightly. I didn't blow up. I didn't yell. I just looked at her, entirely blank-faced, and walked inside. I thought the worst part of the evening was going to be dealing with her snobbery. I was so incredibly wrong. Walking into the house felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The foyer was loud, echoing with the chatter of about 40 people, family members, Caleb's frat brothers, and snobby neighbors. The house was undeniable proof of forced, leveraged wealth. High ceilings, cheap faux marble floors, a chandelier that looked completely out of place. I knew for a fact my parents had heavily subsidized Caleb's down payment for this monstrosity, constantly bailing him out to ensure his life looked perfect from the outside. Caleb came jogging out of the kitchen holding a craft beer. He looked healthy, perfectly tanned, wearing a crisp designer polo, the golden child in his natural habitat. "Elias," he shouted, giving me a half-hearted, one-armed bro hug. He pulled back quickly, his eyes immediately dropping to my faded hoodie. His smile faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. "You made it, man. You didn't have time to change? You look rough." "I came straight from work," I said calmly, forcing a polite smile. Happy housewarming, Caleb. The place is massive. Yeah, isn't it? He puffed out his chest, looking around proudly. Got a killer deal. Dad really came through with the mortgage broker negotiations. And approve. I'm sure he did, I replied quietly. Vanessa materialized next to him, linking her arm through his and resting her head on his shoulder. So, you met Vanessa at the door, Caleb said. We met, Vanessa said, giggling. I almost sent him to the servants' quarters. Can you believe it? But honestly, Caleb, you didn't tell me your brother was struggling this much. We should really pack him some leftover catering tonight so he has something to eat tomorrow. Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of her comment, my father, Marcus, walked into the hallway. He was a tall man who carried himself like a Fortune 500 CEO, despite never rising above middle management. He held a crystal glass of scotch. Elias, my father greeted me with a stiff nod. No hug, no handshake. He looked at my outfit with open, unfiltered disdain. I specifically texted you to dress appropriately. We have people from the golf club here. It reflects poorly on your mother and me when you show up looking like a vagrant who wandered off the street. Nice to see you too, Dad, I said, feeling that familiar, childish lump of rejection form in my throat. I pushed it down instantly. I held out the gift bag toward Caleb. Here. For the new kitchen. Caleb took the bag. It was heavy. Inside was a set of hand-forged German Damascus steel chef's knives. I had purchased them directly from a master artisan during a business trip to Munich 2 months ago. They cost more than the rusted Toyota I had parked in his driveway. I had wrapped them in simple, unbleached brown artisan paper because I appreciate the craftsmanship, not flashy, wasteful packaging. Caleb peered inside, pulling back the brown paper. He frowned, looking genuinely confused. Knives? They are hand-forged German Damascus steel, I began to explain. The artisan is a master who. Are they second-hand, Elias? My mother, Sylvia, interrupted, having just walked up behind my father. The wrapping paper looks like something you pulled out of a recycling bin. Vanessa peered into the bag and let out a tinkling, horribly condescending laugh. Oh, Elias, it is completely okay. We know things are really tight for you right now. Honestly, it is the thought that counts. We can use them to open Amazon boxes in the garage or something. Caleb, put them away before anyone sees that hideous packaging. I felt a sudden rush of heat in my chest. Vanessa, those knives are worth more than. Stop, my father cut in, his voice cracking like a whip in the hallway. Do not get defensive. Vanessa is being incredibly gracious about your cheap gift. Do not make a scene just because you feel embarrassed about your financial situation. I looked from my father to my brother. Caleb wouldn't even meet my eyes. He was too busy smiling apologetically at Vanessa, as if my mere presence was a burden he had to actively manage. I'm not embarrassed, I said, my voice hardening. I am trying to tell you what the gift actually is. We get it, my father said, taking a sip of his scotch and waving me off dismissively. You did what you could afford. Now, go get yourself a glass of tap water, and try to blend into the background. Or maybe just stay in the kitchen, let it go. You are making this awkward for everyone. Let it go. That was the family motto. Whenever I was being openly disrespected, I was told to let it go. I watched them turn their backs on me. Vanessa whispered something in Caleb's ear, and he chuckled, kissing her temple. My father patted Caleb on the shoulder, beaming with absolute pride. They walked toward the living room, leaving me standing completely alone in the grand foyer. I took a slow, deep breath. I could have walked out right then. I could have gotten back into my car, driven to my penthouse, and completely erased them from my life forever. But as I stood there, I remembered an internal company memo I had skimmed just before leaving my office that morning. It was a notification from my HR department about the new corporate hires for the quarter. I hadn't looked at the names closely at the time, but as I watched Vanessa saunter into the living room, acting like absolute royalty, a realization hit me like a runaway freight train. I remembered seeing a face on that HR memo, a face with perfectly styled hair and a manufactured, arrogant smile. Vanessa. I reached into my pocket and gripped my phone. A slow, absolute calm washed over me, completely erasing my physical exhaustion. They wanted to play games about status, they wanted to humiliate me over money and power. But they had forgotten one fundamental rule of the world. The person who signs the paychecks is the only one who truly holds the power. I decided right then and there, I wasn't going to leave. I was going to watch this entire charade burn to the ground. Update 1. I walked into the massive living room, grabbing a glass of water from the kitchen island on my way. The room was packed with people trying entirely too hard to look important. I stood quietly near the heavy stone fireplace, leaning against the wall, and simply observed. Vanessa was holding court in the center of the room. She was a predator in a designer dress, floating from group to group, dominating every single conversation. I watched her corner my Aunt Margaret, asking pointed, invasive questions about the square footage of Margaret's vacation home, clearly calculating the woman's net worth in real time. But her absolute favorite target was me. She seemed to possess a radar for vulnerability, and she had incorrectly identified me as the weakest link in the room, the designated punching bag she could use to elevate her own status in front of my family. Eventually, she dragged Caleb over to where I was standing. She was flanked by a couple of her friends, including a woman named Sophie, who looked at me with the exact same expression you'd give a piece of trash stuck to your shoe, and Liam, one of Caleb's obnoxious frat brothers. "So, Elias," Vanessa announced, her voice deliberately loud enough to make the surrounding guests stop and listen. "Caleb tells me you are still single and still freelancing." "I'm focused on my career right now," I said neutrally, taking a sip of my water. Vanessa giggled, a sharp, grating sound. "Right, your time's career. Freelancing is just so brave. I mean, not knowing where your next paycheck is coming from, constantly hustling for pennies. I would absolutely die of anxiety, but I guess you're just used to living at the bottom of the barrel." Sophie snickered, covering her mouth. Liam shook his head, looking at me with pure pity. Caleb shifted, uncomfortably on his feet, but remained entirely silent. He swirled his beer, refusing to defend his own brother. "I managed just fine," I said, keeping my gaze locked on Vanessa. "Well, you should really take some notes from me," Vanessa said, puffing out her chest and tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I just landed a massive position, a real times career, Elias. Not just gig work. It comes with an insane salary, full executive benefits, and an incredible upward trajectory." "Oh?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Where at?" "Zenith Dynamics," she announced, beaming with arrogant pride. "It is the hottest enterprise tech firm in the entire country. We handle accounts for massive global corporations. The hiring process was absolutely brutal. They only let the absolute elite in." My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest. "We." She used the word times we. I knew for a fact the new hire orientation was this past Monday. She had been at my company for exactly 3 days. "Is that so?" I asked softly. "Oh, absolutely," Vanessa continued, her voice rising as she realized she had captivated the room. My father drifted over, standing next to Caleb, looking incredibly pleased that his future daughter-in-law was such a high roller. "The culture there is incredibly exclusive," Vanessa lied, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of her own fabrication. "High stakes, high reward. My starting salary is easily triple what you've made in the last 5 years combined, Elias." "That sounds very impressive," my father chimed in, clapping a heavy hand on Caleb's shoulder. "See, Elias? That is what real ambition looks like. Vanessa is going places. You could learn a thing or two about work ethic from her." I looked at my father. "I'm sure I could, Dad." Vanessa wasn't done. She was drunk on the attention. "I'm actually practically best friends with the CEO," she boasted, waving her champagne flute around. "He is this terrifying, incredibly powerful guy, but he took an immediate shine to me. He said I have the exact kind of killer instinct he respects. We're actually doing a private, one-on-one lunch next week to discuss my fast-track promotion to senior management." I almost choked on my water. The CEO. Me. I had been in Munich the week before, and I had been locked in a high-security boardroom in Chicago for the last 3 days. I had never laid eyes on Vanessa in my entire life until she opened the front door an hour ago. "He sounds very discerning," I managed to say, keeping my face entirely blank. "Oh, he is ruthless." Vanessa nodded seriously, playing the part of the seasoned corporate veteran. "He absolutely hates incompetence. He fires people on the spot if they don't present themselves flawlessly. Honestly, Elias, if you walked into our corporate lobby looking like times that," she gestured wildly at my hoodie and jeans, "our security team would tackle you to the floor before you even got near the elevators." Sophie laughed out loud. Liam chuckled. Even my father cracked a wide smile. "Well," my father said, looking at me with total disappointment, "at least someone in Caleb's life is making something of themselves. Good for you, Vanessa. Caleb, you picked an absolute winner." "I try, Marcus," Vanessa simpered, leaning into my father's praise. She turned back to me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "Maybe once my promotion is official next week, I can pull some strings and see if there is an opening in the mailroom for you, Elias, or maybe on the janitorial staff. We always need people to empty the trash bins after hours." The room went dead quiet for a split second. It was a vicious, calculated insult. It was a step too far, even for a family that hated me. But then, Caleb laughed. It was a nervous, coerced laugh, but it was a laugh. "Yeah," Caleb said, looking at me. "Maybe you can help him out, babe. Lord knows he needs it." I looked at my brother, the boy I used to protect from neighborhood bullies. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement with the janitor comment. And finally, I looked at Vanessa, who was grinning like she had just won the lottery, completely oblivious to the fact that she was currently mocking the man who literally owned her entire professional existence. "You know, Vanessa," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of the quiet, submissive son. I would absolutely love to hear more about your specific role at Zenith, especially about this intimate lunch with the CEO. Oh, honey, she sneered, rolling her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. You wouldn't understand the corporate lingo, even if I dumbed it down for you. Let's just stick to topics you can grasp. How is that rusted Toyota running? Still barely passing inspection? The urge to scream was right there, sitting at the back of my throat, but I didn't storm off. Storming off implies a loss of emotional control. And if there was one thing building an empire from a freezing basement had taught me, it was that emotion is a massive liability in a hostile negotiation. And this was no longer a family party. This was a hostile corporate takedown. I need to use the restroom, I said, my voice eerily calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic adrenaline pumping through my veins. Down the hall, second door on the left, Caleb muttered, refusing to look at me. He was too busy refilling Vanessa's glass. And please do not use the master bath, Vanessa called out loudly after me. I really do not want you touching my expensive skincare products with those hands. Another ripple of cruel laughter followed me down the hallway. I kept walking, my spine rigid, my face locked into a mask of stone. I stepped into the guest bathroom, closed the heavy door, and locked it. The silence inside the bathroom was instant and heavy. I leaned back against the solid wood door, closing my eyes for just a second. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The physical exhaustion was still there, the dark circles, the messy hair, the stained shirt underneath my hoodie, but the dull, aching resignation in my eyes was entirely gone. It was replaced by the sharp, steely glint I usually reserved for aggressive corporate takeovers and hostile board meetings. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, not from sadness, but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I unlocked the screen and immediately bypassed my standard apps, navigating straight to the Zenith Dynamics internal administrative directory. It is a highly secure, encrypted application accessible only to C-suite executives. I bypassed the standard login using my biometric passkey, the master key to the entire kingdom. I tapped the search bar and typed in her last name. One result populated immediately. Vanessa Miller. Van. Position, Junior Account Temp. Department, Regional Sales. Status, 9-0, day probationary period. Start date, Monday, 3 days ago. I tapped heavily on her digital profile, pulling up her internal file. Her resume was attached. I scanned it quickly, my eyes darting over the text. It was heavily embellished, to put it politely. She claimed 5 years of senior management experience at a marketing firm that I knew for an absolute fact had gone bankrupt and liquidated 3 years ago. But the real goldmine was the internal notes left by the HR department and her direct manager. Note 1. Candidate is enthusiastic, but lacks basic technical proficiency. Hiring on a strict trial basis due to an external referral. Note 2 added yesterday. Employee showed up 40 minutes late. Displayed aggressive behavior toward the administrative staff when asked to wear a visitor badge. Monitor very closely for cultural fit. Risk of termination high. Cultural fit, I whispered to the empty bathroom, a cold smile touching my lips. In Zenith corporate terms, monitor for cultural fit was HR code for do not let this person become a toxic liability, prepare to fire them. She had lied about her senior position. She had lied about her massive salary. But the lie about the private lunch, the public claim that she was being personally mentored for senior management by the CEO, that was the exact leverage I needed. It was no longer just a personal, petty family insult. It was a gross misrepresentation of company leadership. It was a fireable offense. It was grounds for a corporate lawsuit. I didn't waste another second. I opened my secure email client and drafted an urgent, priority-flagged message to Victor, my vice president of sales and the man who technically oversaw Vanessa's department. Victor was a ruthless, no-nonsense executive who had been with me since the early days. Subject: urgent, immediate action required regarding new hire Vanessa Miller. Victor, I am currently at a personal family event and have unfortunately just crossed paths with your new probationary hire, Vanessa Miller. She is currently standing in a room full of people publicly representing herself as a senior executive. She is explicitly claiming that she and I have a standing private lunch appointment next week to discuss her promotion to management. She is using the Zenith name to leverage social standing and making false claims about company operations. Confirm her actual schedule for the week. Have HR pull her termination paperwork immediately. Also, keep your phone on you. I will need you on an active call in exactly 10 minutes. Elias. I hit send. The email vanished into the server. Then, I opened my calendar application. I took a screenshot of my itinerary from the past 2 weeks. Munich meetings from dawn until midnight. The Horizon Tech merger in Chicago. I had the trap fully set. I had the bait perfectly placed. Now, I just needed her to walk blindly into it in front of my entire family. I washed my hands, splashing freezing cold water on my face, patting it dry with a plush guest towel. I deliberately didn't try to fix my hair. I didn't try to smooth out my faded hoodie. Let them look at the struggling, pathetic brother, Let them soak in their false superiority. It was going to make the impending execution that much more devastating. When I walked back out into the living room, the dynamic of the party had shifted again. The music was louder. Vanessa was now sitting on the massive white leather sofa, her designer shoes kicked off, her legs tucked under her. She looked every inch the mistress of the manor. My father was sitting in an armchair directly across from her, looking at her with an expression of deep reverence and respect, an expression he had never, not once in 33 years, directed at me. Caleb was perched on the arm of the sofa, his hand resting possessively on Vanessa's shoulder. They looked like a perfect, successful, elite family, and I was the dirt tracked onto their expensive rug. I walked over, deliberately stepping directly into the center of their circle, blocking the television screen. Back so soon? Vanessa quipped, not even bothering to look up from her phone. I was worried you got lost. A house this size is a lot bigger than the cramped apartments you're used to. I found my way just fine, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the music. I didn't sit down. Standing gave me the physical and psychological high ground, even if they were entirely too arrogant to realize it yet. I was actually thinking about what you said earlier, Vanessa. About Zenith Dynamics. Vanessa's head snapped up, her perfectly manicured eyebrows narrowed. What about it? I'm just genuinely impressed, I said, injecting a tone of innocent curiosity into my voice. It's a notoriously tough industry. Corporate tech at that level requires a massive amount of integrity. It requires a killer instinct. Which you clearly completely lack, Elias. Vanessa corrected me, her lip curling into a sneer. That is exactly why I am on the fast track to the top. And you are. Well, you. Right, the fast track. I nodded slowly, putting my hands in the pockets of my hoodie. You mentioned earlier that the CEO took a real shine to you. What is he actually like? I've read a few articles in the financial trades, but they say he's notoriously private and never interacts with junior staff. Vanessa took a slow sip of her champagne, actively relishing the attention. The entire circle of guests, my dad, Caleb, Liam, Sophie, all leaned in, hanging on her every word. He is very private, Vanessa said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, playing the ultimate insider. But, with me, he really opened up. We had this incredible heart-to-heart in his corner office on Wednesday afternoon. He told me he is so incredibly tired of the yes men surrounding him on the executive board. He needs someone fresh, someone with real vision. He actually asked me for my strategic advice on the London account. The room murmured with deep appreciation. Wow, Caleb said, beaming down at her. Babe, that's massive. The London account. I felt a cold, sharp smile tugging at the absolute corner of my mouth. I had her. She had stepped directly onto the landmine. The London account, I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, losing the innocent act. That sounds absolutely fascinating, Vanessa. What kind of client is it? Tech fashion, Vanessa waved her hand dismissively, her diamond engagement ring catching the harsh light of the obnoxious chandelier. It's high-end tech robotics, multi-billion-dollar stuff. It's strictly confidential. Obviously, you wouldn't know the corporate clients even if I spelled their names out for you on a whiteboard. Obviously, I said, keeping my voice incredibly even. The sheer audacity of her lie was almost impressive. I deal with multi-billion-dollar tech robotics firms on a weekly basis. I know their executives, I know their quarterly margins, and I know for a fact that none of them would ever trust a junior probationary temp with their confidential product roadmaps. It's just strange. What's strange? Vanessa snapped, her tone dripping with sudden, venomous irritation. She didn't like being questioned by the man she had just publicly designated as the family loser. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Well, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket and looking at the screen casually, as if I were checking the evening weather forecast. I follow the corporate tech industry pretty closely. It's a hobby of mine. And I know for an absolute fact that Zenith Dynamics does not have a London account. Their European operations are exclusively based out of Munich and Berlin. They actually closed the London satellite office 4 years ago before their massive internal restructuring. It was all over the financial news. The silence that followed my words was sharp, immediate, and incredibly heavy. The smug, superior smile on Vanessa's face faltered for a fraction of a second. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing slightly like a fish pulled out of water. She was searching for a lifeline, a way to spin the web of lies she had tangled herself in. What would you know about it? She spat, her face flushing a blotchy, furious pink beneath her expensive foundation. You probably read that on some outdated tech blog while you were waiting in line at Walmart. I am on the inside, Elias. I am the one attending the high-level meetings. I know exactly what is happening in the boardroom and with the CEO. I pressed forward, completely ignoring her pathetic insult. I took a single, deliberate step closer to the white leather sofa. I wanted her to feel the physical pressure of the conversation shifting. You explicitly stated to everyone in this room that you met him on Wednesday afternoon for a heart-to-heart in his corner office. Yes, Vanessa shouted, her carefully crafted composure completely cracking under the pressure. Why are you aggressively interrogating me in my own home? Are you seriously that jealous of my salary? Are you that desperate to tear me down because you are a complete failure who can't even afford a decent haircut? It's just that on Wednesday, I said, scrolling through my phone and holding it up slightly, the major financial trade news reported that the CEO of Zenith Dynamics was actually in Chicago. He was heavily occupied with finalizing the massive corporate acquisition of Horizon Tech. In fact, there are high-resolution photos of him signing the closing documents at the exact time you claim you were sitting in his office. I locked eyes with her, letting the cold, heavy reality of my words sink into the silent room. So, I'm just a little confused about how he was deeply discussing corporate strategy with you in his office while he was simultaneously signing legally binding documents 300 miles away. Unless, of course, your new best friend has a clone. Vanessa scrambled. She physically recoiled, jumping to her feet and nearly knocking over her crystal champagne glass in the process. You don't know what you're talking about. He flew back. He took a private corporate jet just to meet with the senior team. He took a private jet in the middle of a multi-million-dollar merger for a casual lunch with a junior hire. I asked softly, letting the absolute absurdity of her lie hang in the air for everyone to examine. I am not a junior hire. Vanessa screamed. The sophisticated, elite career woman vanished instantly into thin air. In her place stood a petulant, cornered bully who realized she was rapidly losing control of her captivated audience. She turned frantically to my brother, her hands shaking. Caleb, are you really going to stand there and let your pathetic brother speak to me like this? He is calling me a liar in front of all of our friends. Caleb jumped off the arm of the sofa, his face burning red with deep embarrassment and sudden, explosive anger. But that anger wasn't directed at the woman screaming blatant, easily disprovable lies in his living room. As always, the anger was directed squarely at me. Elias, enough. Caleb barked, stepping aggressively between me and Vanessa, puffing out his chest in a show of false dominance. What the hell is wrong with you? You come into my house looking like absolute trash, you hand me a box of cheap knives, and now you are trying to humiliate my fiancée in front of my guests because what? You're bitter? You're jealous? She has a real career, a massive salary, and you are a broke loser. I'm not jealous, Caleb, I said, my voice rock steady, even though it physically hurt to see my own brother defend a manipulative stranger so blindly. I am trying to warn you. She is lying directly to your face. She is lying about her job, she is lying about her position, and she is lying about who she actually is. Stop it right now. My father, Marcus, stood up from his armchair. His heavy footsteps echoed aggressively on the hardwood floor as he loomed over me. His face twisted in absolute, unfiltered disgust. I knew I shouldn't have invited you, my father snarled, pointing a thick, accusing finger directly at my chest. You always do this. You have always done this. You cannot stand to see anyone else in this family succeed. Caleb is doing incredibly well. He has a beautiful piece of real estate, a successful fiancé, and you just want to drag them down to your miserable level. Vanessa has been nothing but gracious to you today, and you attack her out of pure spite. She called me a beggar, Dad, I said, gesturing down to my faded clothes. She tried to send me to the service entrance. You call that gracious? You call that acceptable behavior? She was joking, my father yelled, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. It was a harmless joke. God, you are so incredibly sensitive. We drained the entire college fund to make sure Caleb had a solid start in life, and you have held a grudge ever since. No wonder you can't hold down a real job. No wonder you are stuck in whatever dead-end life you are living. He's completely right, Vanessa chimed in from safely behind Caleb's back. She peeked out with a smug, teary-eyed expression, putting on the theatrical performance of a lifetime. She wiped a completely fake tear from her cheek, her voice trembling with manufactured victimhood. I tried to be nice, Caleb. I really tried to welcome him, but he is just deeply toxic. He has toxic, negative energy. I do not want him in my house anymore. You heard her, Caleb said aggressively, pointing toward the heavy front door. Get your coat and get out, Elias. Seriously, leave. You are ruining my housewarming party. Right at that exact second, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was the priority email reply from Victor, my VP of sales. Victor, Elias, are you serious? Vanessa Miller started Monday. She is an entry-level temp in regional sales. She is on a strict 90-day probation. I am looking at her timesheet right now. She clocked out early twice this week without authorization. She has zero clearance to speak on behalf of the company, let alone discuss corporate accounts. What exactly is she saying? This is a massive liability. Do you want me to call building security, or are you handling this personally? I read the text slowly. I absorbed the absolute power it gave me. Then I looked up at my brother, who was still pointing angrily at the door. I looked at my father, who was shaking his head in profound disappointment, loudly mourning the fact that I was his son. I thought the absolute worst part of my life was growing up feeling invisible in my own home. I was so incredibly wrong. The worst part was realizing I had spent 33 years desperately craving the approval of people who were fundamentally shallow, materialistic, and worthless. I will leave, I said, raising a single hand to halt their collective screaming. But before I walk out that door, I think there is one very important phone call we need to make. No more games, Elias. Caleb snapped, taking a threatening step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Just get out before I physically throw you out. Vanessa, I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the heavy, hostile noise of the room. I looked directly over Caleb's shoulder, pinning her with a dead, icy stare that I usually reserved for hostile boardroom negotiations. If you are practically best friends with the CEO of Zenith Dynamics, why don't you call him right now? Pull out your phone, put him on speaker, and let's clear up this little misunderstanding. Introduce me to your incredible mentor. Vanessa froze entirely. The fake tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by a stark, genuine panic. She darted her gaze around the room like a trapped animal, looking for an escape route. The surrounding guests, including Sophie, Liam, and my Aunt Margaret, were all watching intently now. The music had been turned down by someone, and you could hear a pin drop. They smelled the blood in the water. I can't do that. She stammered, crossing her arms defensively, her knuckles turning white. It's the weekend. He is an incredibly busy man. I strictly respect his personal boundaries. I am not going to bother him with petty family drama. That's funny, I said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Caleb to back up slightly to maintain his balance. Because you just spent the last 20 minutes bragging to a room full of strangers about how he took a deeply personal shine to you. Surely, a man who values your strategic vision so highly would take a quick weekend phone call from his star protege. She is bluffing, Caleb. Vanessa shrieked, clutching his arm with her manicured claws, her voice hitting a hysterical pitch. Make him leave. He is completely crazy. He is trying to ruin my life. I'm not bluffing, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, suffocating quiet of the living room. In fact, I have the Zenith corporate directory right here on my phone. I turned the screen of my phone around so the entire room could clearly see the glowing blue interface of the highly restricted company app. This is the live organizational chart for the entire corporation, I explained, tapping the screen to demonstrate its functionality. Right up here at the very top is the executive board. Below that are the vice presidents. Down here are the senior regional managers. I kept scrolling, my thumb flicking rapidly across the glass, watching their eyes follow the movement. And if we scroll all the way down, past the actual executives, past the mid-level managers, past the administrative assistants, all the way down into the probationary temp pool. Here we go. Vanessa Miller, junior account temp, salary bracket is entry level. The room went completely, devastatingly silent. I saw Sophie lean in slightly, squinting to read the precise text on my glowing screen. That is an old list. Vanessa yelled, her voice cracking in pure, unadulterated panic. Her face was a mask of sheer terror now. The internal system hasn't updated yet. I was given a verbal promotion yesterday by the regional director. A verbal promotion to the executive board after exactly 3 days of employment? I asked, my tone dripping with absolute, lethal sarcasm. Vanessa, that is not how corporate tech firms work. That is not how human resources operates. And that is definitely not how my Times company works. Your company? My father barked a harsh, mocking laugh, taking a step toward me. Elias, have you completely lost your mind? Are you having a mental breakdown? Now you are claiming you work there too? As what? The janitor Vanessa joked about? No, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that carried infinitely more weight than any of their loud screaming. I don't just work there. I looked directly at Vanessa. She had gone completely pale. The blood had entirely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and terrified. She was staring at me, truly looking at me for the very first time. She was looking at the confident, unbothered way I held my shoulders. She was looking at the expensive phone in my hand, recognizing the proprietary administrative software that only top-level executives were allowed to install on their devices. You bragged about your massive career, I said to her, the silence in the room hanging thick and heavy like a physical weight. You bragged about the exclusive corporate culture. You bragged about the CEO firing people on the spot for incompetence. I took one more step closer. Caleb tried to block me again, but he faltered, entirely confused by the sudden, massive shift in the power dynamic of the room. He looked from me to Vanessa, deeply unsure of what was actually happening. You forgot one massive, fatal thing when you were doing your shallow research to build this fake persona. Vanessa, I said smoothly, you never checked to see who actually founded Zenith Dynamics. It's a holding company, Vanessa stammered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the syllables. It's owned by a massive investment group. It's owned by EM Holdings. I am EM Holdings, I corrected her, my words landing like heavy stones dropped into a perfectly still pond. EM stands for Elias Miller. I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Her knees actually buckled slightly, forcing her to lean heavily against the arm of the leather sofa to keep from collapsing onto the floor. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically from side to side. "No, that is entirely impossible. You drive a rusted Toyota. You look like this. You look like you buy your clothes at a thrift store." "I drive a Toyota because I pour my revenue into paying my developers top salary and securing top-tier talent," I said calmly. "And I look like this because I just spent 3 exhausting days closing the Horizon Tech merger that you read about in the news. The exact merger I negotiated. The exact merger I signed." "Caleb," Vanessa whispered. She looked frantically from me to Caleb, desperate for him to deny it. "Elias, stop lying. Dad, tell him to stop lying. He's faking it," Vanessa screamed. The sheer desperation in her voice completely betrayed her. She lunged forward, trying to aggressively grab my phone out of my hand. "Give me that. You faked that app. You paid someone to build a fake app. You are a fraud." I pulled the phone back easily, stepping out of her reach with practiced ease. "I didn't fake this." I pressed the call button on Victor's contact file. I put the phone on speaker and held it up high enough for the entire room to hear. The line rang twice. The sound echoed painfully in the tension-filled living room. "Elias." Victor's voice boomed from the speaker. Crisp, authoritative, and utterly professional. "I got your email. I am looking at Miller's digital file right now. Why the hell is a junior temp claiming executive status? Do you want me to terminate her building access immediately? Because if she is misrepresenting company operations at a public event, that is a direct violation of Clause 4 in her non-disclosure contract. Our corporate lawyer is already drafting the paperwork for the lawsuit." Vanessa let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Caleb's jaw physically dropped. My father's crystal glass of scotch slipped from his numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor and shattering into 100 pieces. The silence that followed Victor's voice was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the oxygen right out of the room. The only sound was the jagged crunch of broken glass under my father's expensive shoe as he shifted his weight, staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a live explosive. "I need a verbal confirmation, Elias," Victor continued, his voice tinny but unmistakable. "Is Miller causing a public scene? I can have local security there in 20 minutes. I didn't look at the phone, I kept my eyes locked onto Vanessa. The arrogance, the sneer, the pity. It was all completely gone, replaced by raw, naked ruin. "No, Victor," I said calmly. "Security won't be necessary." Vanessa was just finishing up a rather loud presentation to my family about how she practically runs Zenith. I think she is done talking now. My phone buzzed again, a banner notification dropping down from the top of the screen. I glanced at it. It was a direct message on LinkedIn from Sophie, the exact same friend who had been mocking my clothes 5 minutes ago. "Hey Elias, so crazy we just met. I am actually looking to transition into tech sales. Would love to grab a coffee and pick your brain about opportunities at Zenith." I swiped the notification away in disgust. I thought the worst part of wealth was dealing with fake corporate friends. I was so incredibly wrong. The worst part was watching the people you grew up with reveal exactly how little they valued loyalty, and how quickly they would betray each other for a paycheck. "Vanessa," Caleb whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward the woman he was supposed to marry. His voice was hollow, stripped of all the arrogant bravado he had displayed just moments ago. Vanessa recoiled from him, bursting into genuine, hysterical tears. Her heavy, expensive makeup began to run down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "Caleb, please, you have to understand. It was just a little white lie. I just wanted to impress your father. Everyone exaggerates their resume. It's not a big deal. It's just corporate politics." Caleb took a massive step back, his face twisting from deep confusion into absolute, pure disgust. But the truly tragic reality was he wasn't disgusted because she had maliciously attacked and humiliated his own brother. He was disgusted because she had embarrassed him in front of his wealthy neighbors and his fraternity brothers. She had made him look like a gullible, easily manipulated fool. "You lied to me," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "You told me you were pulling in 6 figures. You told me you could cover half the mortgage on this house. You told me your family was wealthy. You tried to get my brother fired from his own company. I didn't know." Vanessa shrieked, turning her vitriol back onto me. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger at my chest. "How was I supposed to know? Look at him, he looks like a homeless bum. He drives a piece of junk. He completely tricked me. He set me up to look stupid." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that scraped the back of my throat. "I didn't trick you, Vanessa. I simply stood here and existed. You filled in the blanks with your own extreme prejudice. You saw a faded jacket and assumed failure. You saw a quiet man and assumed weakness. That is not on me. That is entirely on you." I lifted the phone back to my mouth. "Victor, I'm still here." "I hear you, boss," Victor replied, waiting for the final word. "Terminate Vanessa Miller's contract immediately," I ordered, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. Effective this exact second. Mark her file as gross misconduct and misrepresentation of corporate authority. Cancel her health benefits, revoke her building badge, and freeze her company email. And Victor, have the legal team send a cease and desist tomorrow morning. If I hear she has used the Zenith brand to leverage so much as a free coffee, I want her sued into absolute bankruptcy. Understood, Victor said. It's done. Have a good night, Elias. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. No. Vanessa screamed, dropping to her knees on the expensive rug, completely abandoning whatever dignity she had left. You can't do this. You can't fire me on a Saturday. I will sue you. My dad has a lawyer. You are on a probationary period, Vanessa, I stated coldly, looking down at her pathetic display. I can legally fire you for wearing the wrong color shoes to the office. But firing you for publicly humiliating the CEO and breaching a confidentiality contract? That is a legal slam dunk. Save your dad's money. You are going to need it to pay your rent next month. Vanessa looked frantically around the room, desperate for a single ally. She looked at Sophie, but Sophie was suddenly fascinated by the ceiling. She looked at Liam, who actively turned his back and started checking his phone. Finally, she looked at my father. Marcus, please, she sobbed, holding her hands up in a pleading gesture. You know me, you know I am a good person, please talk to him. My father looked at Vanessa. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and looked at me. For the first time in 33 years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He looked at the son he had dismissed, mocked, and financially abandoned. He realized he was standing in the presence of a man who could buy and sell his entire life's work 10 times over before lunch. Vanessa, my father said, his voice trembling slightly, entirely lacking his usual booming authority. I think you need to leave my son's house. Vanessa gasped, a horrible, ragged sound. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her designer purse from the sofa. She looked at Caleb one last time, waiting for him to defend her. Caleb just pointed sharply at the door. Liam silently walked over and opened the heavy front door, waiting to escort her out. As she walked past me, Vanessa stopped. Her face was twisted in pure, unadulterated hatred. You are a monster, she hissed under her breath. You are going to die completely alone with all your money. Better than dying a pathetic fraud, I replied smoothly, not blinking. She stormed out, the heavy door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent house. Within seconds, the guests began awkwardly murmuring their excuses. Aunt Margaret scurried toward the door, avoiding my gaze entirely. The snobby neighbors practically ran to their cars. The house emptied out in less than 3 minutes, leaving only me, Caleb, and my parents standing in the wreckage of the living room. Update 2. My father cleared his throat. He forced a wide, completely unnatural smile onto his face and took a cautious step toward me. Elias, my boy, my father said, his voice dripping with sudden, sickening affection. I had absolutely no idea. EM Holdings. My God, you are a CEO. You are a titan. Your mother and I are so incredibly proud of you. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the greedy gleam in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his son. He was looking at a walking college fund, a retirement plan, a shiny new trophy he could brag about at the country club. He was looking at the inheritance he felt he was somehow owed. Do not, I said, my voice freezing the air between us. Do not try to claim my success now. You didn't build this. You didn't support this. You let me eat ramen in a freezing basement while you bought Caleb a luxury condo. You laughed at my clothes tonight, because you thought I was poor. You failed the test, Dad. I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. Elias, wait. Caleb called out, his voice desperate. Are we okay? We're brothers, right? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I looked at the boy I used to protect. Enjoy the knives, Caleb. Cut something out of your life that is actually holding you back. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them completely behind. I got into my rusted Toyota Corolla, turned the key, and smiled as the old engine roared to life. 6 months later, the air in my new penthouse was completely silent, save for the gentle hum of the central climate control system. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a mug of premium coffee, looking down at the sprawling city skyline below. The penthouse was stunning: private elevator access, imported marble counters, and enough physical space to finally breathe. I had bought it the week after the disastrous housewarming party. I walked into the real estate office, viewed the property once, and handed them a cashier's check for the full amount in cash. My company, Zenith Dynamics, had officially doubled its quarterly revenue following the successful Horizon Tech merger. Sarah, my chief operating officer and the only person who had stood by me when we had absolutely nothing, was thriving in her new role as president. My life was finally peaceful, but toxic family has a funny way of trying to drag you back into the mud the exact moment they realize you are standing on solid gold. My cell phone rang on the kitchen island. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Caleb. I had blocked my parents entirely after they tried to show up at my corporate headquarters demanding a meeting, but I had left Caleb unblocked mostly out of morbid curiosity. I answered, putting him on speakerphone while I reviewed a legal document. Elias speaking. Elias. Caleb's voice came through the speaker. He sounded completely broken. The arrogant golden child was entirely gone. Please. Do not hang up. I have exactly 2 minutes before a board meeting. Caleb, what do you want? I could hear him holding back a sob. I'm losing the house, Elias. The bank is foreclosing next month. Vanessa destroyed my credit before the breakup. And mom and dad are in serious trouble. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling absolutely nothing. Trouble? They mortgaged their own house to help pay for my lifestyle, Caleb confessed, the pathetic words tumbling out in a rush. Dad liquidated his $401k to buy that SUV and keep up appearances with the neighbors. Now his logistics firm downsized his department. He was forced into early retirement. They have nothing, Elias. They are completely underwater. They are going to lose their house. We need a loan. Not now. Not. Please, just write us a check. You make that kind of money in a single day. I stood there looking out over the city. I felt a profound sense of sadness for the absolute waste of their lives, but absolutely zero guilt. They had spent their entire lives worshipping the false god of status, pouring their wealth into a son who refused to work for anything. The house of cards had finally collapsed exactly as I always knew it would. They had prioritized vanity over building a real legacy. Caleb, I said, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. I am not a bank, and I am certainly not your personal financial bailout plan. We are your family, he cried desperately. You can't just let mom and dad go bankrupt. What about my future? Fast asked. Your future is your responsibility, I replied firmly. I will not write you a check, I will not hand you a single dollar. But because I am not a monster, I will offer you a lifeline. Caleb gasped, a sudden spark of greedy hope returning to his voice. Anything. Name it. You. I have an opening in the logistics warehouse at Zenith, I said calmly. It is intense manual labor. Packing boxes, moving heavy server inventory. It pays minimum wage. There are no corporate benefits, and you will clock in at 6 in the morning sharp every single day. If you want to learn the value of a dollar, the exact same way Dad told me to learn it when he refused to pay for my college fund, the job is yours. But that is the only help you will ever get from me. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. The heavy, crushing weight of reality was finally settling onto his pampered shoulders. I can't pack boxes, Caleb whispered, his toxic pride still somehow intact despite his total financial ruin. What would my friends think? Then I guess you have a lot of packing to do at your own house before the bank takes it, I said. Goodbye, Caleb. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the marble counter. That afternoon, I drove my 2012 Toyota Corolla down to a local charity center and completely donated it, tossing the keys to a young kid who desperately needed a reliable ride to get to his community college classes. The long, exhausting chapter of Elias the struggling scapegoat was officially closed forever. I walked into the massive glass lobby of Zenith Dynamics. The security guard nodded respectfully. My employees smiled warmly as I walked past. I wasn't just a survivor of a deeply toxic family anymore. I was a man who had built his own table when he was violently denied a seat at theirs. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.